And we are officially recording. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us for this artificial intelligence, the good, the bad, and I almost want to say the ugly, but that's the wrong word, the amazing opportunities. I would like to thank everybody that's a part of it. I'd especially like to thank our moderator, Lance Fortnow, and our panelists for taking time. They are all volunteers and are sharing their wisdom with us. With that said, I really want to get out of the way here and turn it over to Lance Fortnow, who is the Dean of our College of Computing. He comes to us from various other universities, including Northwestern University of Chicago and several others. He is somebody I'm proud to call my boss, and I'm thrilled that he's moderating our panel. I'll turn it over to him so he can introduce the esteemed panel.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And let me also thank Erica Burt and Yolanda Freeman, who also helped put together this panel. So I'm Lance Fortnow. I'm Dean of the College of Computing here at Illinois Tech. I'm myself not an expert in AI. I'm just more of an AI fanboy, but we have four great panelists who are experts in AI to talk about different aspects of artificial intelligence, machine learning, how it's going to affect your lives. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have a lot of questions, so we won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll try to do my best. We already have some questions from people who registered. And also let me request that if you're not one of the panelists, please mute yourself so we don't get a lot of crosstalk. So let me just quickly tell you who the panelists are, and then we'll get right into it. We have Jennifer DeWinter. She's Dean of the Lewis College of Science and Letters here at Illinois Tech. Hannah Ringler, Assistant Teaching Professor and Director of Communications across the curriculum in the Lewis College at Illinois Tech. Kai Shu, who's the Gladwin Development Assistant Professor in Computer Science at my college at Illinois Tech. And Vic Thuy Le, hope I'm saying that right, Innovative Technology Strategist, not at Illinois Tech, but still happy to have her. And I'm going to start with kind of giving an area to each of the panelists to let them first kind of introduce themselves quickly, and then talk a little bit about the area, and then we'll go directly to the questions. You know, an hour is going to go by very quickly. So I'll start with Vic Thuy. I wonder if you can kind of just tell us briefly about the landscape of AI today and where it might be going in the near future.
Well, thank you very much, Lance, for that. I am an AI and technology executive. My foray into AI was actually 6 years ago when I headed an organization of data scientists and engineers. We enabled over 300 data scientists with more than 150 projects spanning across 3 countries at the global enterprise level. So that's a lot of work to get that out into production. So I work with the business partners to define what is our strategic directions, and including identifying any new job descriptions, keeping the career development plan up to date so that everyone in my organization has a good career path despite the latest changing technology. And the reasons why that's important, because at that time, we remembered identifying like machine learning engineers, because nothing that we were doing fits any of the current descriptions, right? So those are some of the things that we were trying to evolve to as well. So it's not just technology, but also the career. I'm also very proud of my team because together we received a US patent this summer in machine learning with 2 or 3 more pending. With regards to the current and future state of artificial intelligence, right now we are in an exciting time with AI because I believe that we are at the first step of democratizing AI to make it readily available for everybody. So it's not just for technical people, and it's not just for companies with big, with big funding. That everybody can now have their hands on AI if they wanted to. So that is one of the things, and it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. We're constantly coming up with new ideas. So for an example, we can talk more about it later on. You heard about prompting engineering, and what is that all about? And then there's the evolution of, instead of DevOps, you have machine ops, right? And then instead of having just engineers and developers, now you have what I call AI super users too. And what does that all mean is that in the future, it takes more than just AI and data scientists and engineers to build AI solutions. it also requires us to understand what are the rules and regulations, the data privacy that's involved. How do we make sure that
could change your life.
Great news for people living with diabetes. Now you can wear a continuous glucose monitor.
So is that a question? And then, so not only is it making it available for everyone, but in the future, we also are looking into having 6G and not just 5G for that speed that is needed. We're going into the territory of not just GPU, but TPU. And most importantly, you guys might have heard about ChatGPT and generative AI, but you know what? I have a feeling that sensory engineering is coming along the line too as well.
All right, thank you. Jennifer, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the potential AI harms and biases?
Hi, yes, thank you. So as Lance kindly introduced me, I'm the Dean of Lewis College of Science and Letters here. I have an affiliate appointment over in computer science. My history in AI has mostly actually been in video game and media development, which is not typically in the generative AI space, but more in the reactive machine AI space. Although I have been paying attention to generative. In part because I have to think about how things like ChatGPT or any of these generative models, verbal or visual or sensory. I'm sorry, there's a phone call that needs to be muted now. I'll wait just a moment. Excellent, thank you. So in part because what we're beginning to see is the ways in which many of our workplaces are shifting in response to these. So it's interesting, in the game industry, we're beginning to see new positions opening up for prompt engineers. So people who are able to prompt these generative models instead of paying artists. And so we're beginning to see shifts in these industries. Now, those shifts are actually where you're going to find really interesting ethical questions showing up of who owns the training data that are now being used to create new forms of written material, verbal material, visual material, and indeed, as my colleague says, the future of the sensory materials. What are those? What are the intellectual property issues that we need to consider? But in addition to that, if you think about the ethics of knowledge creation, we have ways in which we've been trained in knowledge creation to interrogate each other's underlying assumptions. And one of the challenges that we have with new models of artificial intelligence is that, A, we don't understand those models enough to interrogate them, and often we don't understand the underlying data feeding into them in order to interrogate them. And so the ethical questions around knowledge creation are going to become much more important, not just because they're going to intersect with things like HIPAA, FERPA, any of the privacy acts in the US, and Europe has a whole different set of privacy acts, East Asia has a whole different set of privacy acts, but also in the ways in which we all have been trained to think about how to ask each other about underlying assumptions, how to ask each other about methods. How do we know information? Right now, that's a black box to us.
Thanks, Jennifer. Kai, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how we enhance trust in AI systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lance. Thank you for having me here. I'm assistant professor at the computer science department, and my research interests are machine learning, data mining, and AI. Regarding about the question about how we can build trust of AI models towards decision making, I think the motivation here is, I think, really when we think about AI models, the ultimate goal is we want to use AI models for our own lives to ensure, a better efficiency or better capacity, right? So we have to think about, when we develop AI models, I'm trained as a computer scientist, so, more from a technical perspective, to enhance the trust between human and AI models, how we can, or what are the factors we need to consider when we build AI algorithms. I think there are several lines of research that are very important. The first one is how we can make sure these models are more explainable and interpretable to humans, so that our end users can better understand the inner working mechanism of AI models and eventually trust the decision made by these AI models. And second one is how we can ensure that the AI models can make like fair and less biased decisions towards different groups of people. We see a lot of examples that AI models can be biased and unfair to specific demographic groups. So that's something we have to address when we develop AI models. The third one is how we can make sure these AI models, they are very robust and are less vulnerable to potential malicious attacks. So all of these different aspects in terms of explainability and fairness and robustness, so on and so forth, should be considered when we think about enhancing human trust to the AI models. Yeah, I will just stop here and talk more about this later.
All right, thank you. And last but not least, Hannah, if you could again introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how we're using AI in education, or how we should be.
Yeah, sure. So, thanks for that introduction. So my name is Hannah Ringler. I'm an assistant teaching professor in the humanities department here at Illinois Tech. I also direct the university's writing curriculum. So my background is in rhetoric and sort of language studies, and I come to sort of AI and generative AI in a couple of ways. So partially through my research, where I'm really engaging a lot with like natural language processing models and thinking about how do we interpret these as humanists? What do they mean? If we know we can classify things, text, for example, really well, what do we learn about the texts? And figuring out those sort of interpretive questions of how you do that. So there's kind of one aspect of engaging with it that way, but then dealing with writing instruction too. I've been teaching students to write in kind of early writing classes for a really long time now at the university level. This past January or late winter with ChatGPT kind of suddenly emerging onto the scene, now dealing with, okay, well, what does writing instruction look like now that we can, students can produce an essay pretty easily on ChatGPT on whatever topic you may throw at them. So that's kind of where I'm coming at everything here. When it comes to AI in education as a whole, I think there's a lot there. We see sort of we saw sort of some initial concern, especially with ChatGPT kind of coming onto the scene about, oh my goodness, students are going to cheat their way through college, and how do we detect them cheating, and all these sorts of questions along those lines. And so some of those questions are kind of calming down, as I think a lot more interesting questions have emerged now of, well, how do we use this productively in education? How can this actually help us to create a better educational experience for students? And what does education need to look like now that this is on the scene? Do we need to be teaching students the same skills that we've always taught them in the past? What's required for a modern kind of nation and workforce now? What kinds of skills do students actually need to have? Are they maybe not the same as they used to be now that we can automate some things? So I think those are a lot more interesting questions that are sort of popping up here. And for me, I think I see a lot of good potential here for the use of generative AI in education, especially when it comes to writing. For example, one thing that we know is that for underprivileged students, first generation students, minority students of a lot of different forms, one of the many reasons, but one of the reasons that students often struggle to like get into their disciplines and succeed in them really well is a difficulty just talking the talk of that discipline, feeling like you know how to engage in computer science and know how to share your ideas in computer science or whatever field that you're in. And one thing that ChatGPT and like technologies are amazing at is helping you to do that, helping you to frame your ideas in the way that sounds like how they should normally go. And so in that way, it kind of opens up this idea of thinking, wow, this can really democratize education in some ways by giving students access to language they didn't have access to before. So, I think there's a lot of hope there and a lot of really good that can come out of it. We're still kind of grappling with figuring out, okay, well, we don't want to trust what comes out of generative AI machines blindly, and students need to be able to critically think about what comes out of those. How do we do that? How do we now teach those good critical thinking types of skills to make sure that when you get something out of ChatGPT, even if it sounds good, is it actually what you want to say? Is that actually accurate? And how do you critically think about that and use that as part of your work? So that's kind of a big space, but I just kind of wanted to sketch some questions there.
All right, thanks, Hannah. So I'm just looking at some of the questions. These are questions that were kind of submitted when people registered. And one big common theme that I'm seeing a lot of people worried about how AI is going to affect their careers. In particular, I got questions like, should all CS majors switch to studying AI? Or do you think AI is going to how's it going to affect junior software development positions for students who are entering the workforce in a couple of years? So I was wondering if someone would want to try to address the future of work question. It's a big one, but
I would love to address that question since, as I've mentioned for my introduction, is that one of the things I like to do is take a current look at what's out there and what technology changed and therefore change your job descriptions. For all of those who are afraid, you might even heard about like how I'm a developer now, I can use AI to generate code, right? So what does that mean for me? Well, first of all, anybody who tried to code using AI, you would know that it is far from being perfect. So if you think about it this way, we will always need engineers and developers because if you think about the operating system, everybody uses it. A lot of our software technologies are on top of it, but there are the difference between those who actually build operating system and develop it at that at that very low system level. And then there are those who are super users because we still need those who knows how to operate the AI tools. Think of AI as a tool, those who built AI tools and those who uses it. So ChatGPT, a perfect example of that is a mom who has a 4-year-old kid with all of the symptoms for 3 years, 17 doctors couldn't solve the problem because she uses ChatGPT in order to properly diagnose and solve the problem. So we need those out there who can use these AI tools to do it. So for business, well, I'd have to start with what is the problem you're trying to solve? That would never go away. And that's just not technology and programming. Second, how do you go in and understand the technology so that you can build creative tools and product on top of that, right? And then there's also, because of the fake news, the ability to go in and we can't really trust the data that's out on the internet, then there are those whose job is now go in. It's like, how do we build tools to validate that? Who's going to validate that? And then, of course, there are those who want to understand about how do you go in and write the rules and regulations, the guidelines and the policies to prevent us from doing bad things with AI, right? So those are things that are always evolving and changing and actually create new jobs.
Yeah, that's great.
Lance, can I add to that really quick?
Sure, definitely.
I always think of technology as a systematized approach to a defined problem, right? So what is AI being used for in the defined problems of the workforces? And what I think we saw, and Hannah kind of spoke to this a little bit, what we saw in the first blush of generative AI was everyone jumping immediately onto it. Like anyone can be an artist, anyone can be a writer, anyone can be a medical researcher, anyone can blah, 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 right? But we actually know this from multiple times when new tools hit the market. There's this first blush where it talks about democratizing everything. And it doesn't. It becomes another tool which expertise is going to be used in, but tools don't coalesce into a single tool. They continue to expand, right? So this becomes yet another tool, and it's the hot and sexy new tool right now. But already we saw in the publishing industry a lot of people firing their copy editors only to rehire them back. We saw people firing their artists only to hire them back because when the AI generated material recycles back in and becomes part of the training set, the output of it becomes weirder. And so we don't have ways in which we can control for that. And also, if we depend on AI to generate all future possibility, we're always limited by the products of the past. And so we're still going to need imaginative creators. We're still going to need imaginative computer scientists. We're still going to need imaginative communicators, right? Like that need is still there in order to continue to use this tool and many others. And so if I was a computer scientist right now, Would I want some skills in AI and or data science? Sure would. Would I switch my entire career over to it? No, I would at least want to be able to talk that talk and work comfortably with those groups.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of great questions here. No, I just want to remind you, if you have questions yourself, we're still happy to have them. Just please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. One of a short one is, should we pause AI? This is probably referring to a letter that was written maybe 6 months ago by a bunch of tech leaders all suggesting we should stop training new AI models. And as far as I can tell, it's been pretty much ignored. But I was wondering if you have thoughts on, should we pause AI and are there real existential threats from artificial intelligence?
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here because of the science here. We're human. There is no way in the world can we pause AI, because that's going to go in and tell, like, down to the child, the person to pause it. It's going to be hard because it's already out there. But what I will do, because right now, for an example, the EU AI Act is out there. I know that our government and leaders are trying to work on those policies. But in the meantime, in order for us to prevent the bias and all the bad things that are happening, is to go in and enable ourselves. We are our own stewards of the data as well as what we do with it, in terms of, like, you ask yourself when you're building it, what is the worst thing that can happen? The direct and unintended consequences. And more importantly, as a guiding principle, ask yourself this question: if I were to build this, how would I feel if I were to use it against me or my friends and family? If you think of that, then you would be more careful in building that solution, not to prevent you from doing it, but at least build enough guardrail around it to prevent it from happening. So one of the perfect examples of that is that when data privacy is a wonderful, there's good reasons why we need data privacy rules and regulations. However, with AI, and the perfect analogy of that is that there's a conflict if we want to prevent AI bias. And the perfect analogy of that is that a lot of you are probably familiar with the fact that drugs out there has been tested mainly among white males, right? So it's not as effective with females or other or people with other ethnicity. So the problem with the data privacy sometimes is prevent us, for an example, to gather data and identify whether it's male or female. But if you want to have that type of prevent AI bias, you need to identify whether it's male or female. So that's just an example of some of the things that we are trying to tackle as we try to improve upon AI.
Yeah, if I may add a bit here, I think, when we talk about whether we should pause AI or not, I think we should think about AI research is different from AI development, right? I mean, in terms of AI research, as I agree, kind of, it's not feasible, if not impossible, to stop it, because this is such a fascinating research area from my perspective. But we do need to be very careful about the AI development, because we have to make sure this AI is not perfect yet, right? There are a lot of problems and challenges. For example, ChatGPT can produce hallucinated and infactual content, and can be biased. And there are so many challenges we have to consider when we deploy AI in the real world. So that's why people care about responsible AI development. It's really big, huge area. So my 2 cents maybe, in terms of AI development, yeah, we should be really careful about these different regulations and how we can better develop responsible AI techniques in the real world. But for AI research, I don't see this possible to really stop it or pause it. That's just my point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I were to add on just quickly, I would say I think the logistics of trying to pause it seem impossible. To ask people to just stop using it or to try to ban it in some way. I know in a very when ChatGPT at least first came out, and I was talking with a lot of other writing instructors, there was this sort of panic of, oh my God, what do we do? Let's get rid of it. Because we don't know how to respond, right? And there's this sort of fear response of this is changing things, right? And therefore, what do I do? And it's creating imperfect things. And what do we do with that? And so, there's a lot of panic and a lot of fear, but I see, if we pause it, well, we can kind of mull over what to do with it, but then it develops again, right? And it keeps developing again, and we're kind of stuck in the cycle of it. And I heard someone say to me the other day, this right now is the worst AI we'll ever have. And I thought, well, I don't know if that's encouraging or not, but maybe. But the point being, right, that this continues to develop, and we have to keep kind of engaging with it as it develops. So I think my approach would be no, that there's it's impossible to sort of pause it, but I think that's all the more reason to kind of step back and look at it very carefully as we're using it, and think really critically about what its output is. And okay, how do we think carefully? How do we make sure that we're using it carefully, knowing that it's imperfect, knowing that there's problems with it, and approaching it with a lot of caution rather than diving in head first.
Well, and I think it's no accident that the major companies fired their ethicists right at the dawn of generative AI. But also, when we talk about pausing AI, we're really talking about this new generative one. AI has been around for a while.
Okay, so I think I get the general consensus here that whether or not we should pause it, it's going to be around and continue to grow. One question that hits close to home is, will AI, do you see AI as a threat to replace faculty and staff in academia? And if so, what are your plans, responses to it? I think everybody feels that their own field is safe, but perhaps no field is safe. But I'd like to get the panelists' responses. Maybe Hannah, you could start with this one.
Sure. So do I feel sort of threatened by this, I guess? Do we feel threatened as a field? My gut response is no. And the simple answer is sort of being, I teach writing by and large. And does ChatGPT produce perfect writing? No, by no means, right? And so, in that sense, in that very basic sense, is there still a space for writing instructors? Yes, I think absolutely. Well, what I do think it changes perhaps the nature of what writing instruction might look like and the types of things that we teach. There's some extent to which I get to spend time teaching students about, for example, like how to write a cover letter. And part of the teaching of that is, well, how do you frame yourself? Who are you? What do you contribute to things? And then also part of the teaching of that is, well, how do you construct paragraphs, and how do you organize the paragraphs and put sentences together in them and highlight experiences and so forth. So there's the kind of bigger level critical thinking, and then there's the kind of like nitty gritty on the ground. How do you construct sentences? And so part of my hope is that eventually this helps to speed up some of the nitty gritty, how do you construct sentences part, and allow a little bit more time for that kind of more exciting critical thinking types of space. The jury's still out on how exactly that's going to play out. But my hope is that it opens up a little more space for that. But that's still very much a necessary part of like writing a cover letter, for example, that only you can really know as you, how you're going to frame yourself as new and interesting. And that almost by nature is not something that ChatGPT or generative AI can do because it's trained on past things, right?
Anyone?
I would love to add on to that. It's like, let me give some two concrete current world example right now in ChatGPT. It is known right now, especially among the researchers, that if you ask a ChatGPT, like for an example, a math question 4 or 6 months ago, you get one answer. If you ask the same question now, you might get a different answer. And that is a problem. And the reasons for that is that if you think about it logically, I mean, like ChatGPT is a large, it's an LLM. It contains, millions, hundreds of thousands of parameters and hyperparameters and all of that. And it is constantly evolving and changing because we are constantly feeding it information, both the people who are knowledgeable in it and those who are not knowledgeable in it. And so ChatGPT can only understand what it is we're feeding, and it's trying to predict what it is that we want at the same time. That's why it's hallucinating, right? Because at the same time, it's grabbing information from the social media, doesn't really understand the real world, outside world concept yet. And it's also trying to predict what we want. So the answer changed. Another perfect example to Hannah's point is that we were comparing ChatGPT with Bard, and one of the officers, he was comparing the two. And one of the lines struck out at me. It's like ChatGPT and DALL-E uses generative AI. Now, those who sit here on the panel knows what is the problem with that sentence. Uses is incorrect. It should have been our generative AI. But for those who don't know anything and learning the first time, if they understand the word uses, they have a wrong definition of idea of what it is. And unfortunately, they will continue to promote that, right? So that is the problem right now to, what Jennifer was alluding to earlier. It is really hard to go in and verify and validate, being able to explain, the models that we're using. So we have to be very careful at this point in time. We're not there yet.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so here's a question that, has come up a little bit, it's been in the news a little bit too. Should I worry that my intellectual property is being used to train AI or answering questions without crediting me or fair use?
Yes.
Jennifer, might be.
Yes. I'll just say that really clearly, right? Like once something exits a protected intellectual property realm and goes into general use, it's no longer your property. And so if intellectual property exists to protect, I don't know, the development of patents, the way to monetize your ideas, right? The ways in which novelists are able to sustain a lifestyle. Yes, we should be worried about that. Because it's undermining property rights. And once we start undermining property rights at intellectual, what else is open to us? Now, the Marxist in me is all like, maybe we should undermine property rights, whatever. But right now, yes.
Is there, you have a way to protect, or do you have an idea of how we could?
It's all policy, right? Like it's not anything a single human can do. And we know this from our own rights to privacy, right? Like at what point do we have privacy, and at what point do social media companies turn us into a type of communication capitalism? They've already figured out how to do that. If you don't have a Facebook account, there's a shadow account. Like we know these things, right? So in order for any of these rights to be protected, it has to come down from an informed government policy. And I think that that's why it's in the news cycle so often, is that it needs to be a push up. Yeah.
I would love to add into that because unfortunately, because I'm not in that industry, so I don't remember the exact what that nonprofit organization, but there's an a union organization or a nonprofit organization that represent all the writer guilds, for an example, or all of the artists. And the good news is that the leaders of each of those organizations are now sitting with our government to define what those rights are. And one of the things that is very heartening for me is that when you go and define the policy, it has to be per specific use cases, because the copyright of a screen is very different from that of a book, which is very different from that of a movie. So there are actually nuances of it. That's the reasons why it makes it so complex, right? And I'm so happy that there are people who are actually expert in that to help our leaders navigate that as they define some of those policies out there.
Yeah, I'll say also there's been some concern in education spaces, certainly about protecting kind of students' intellectual property with the things that they're writing. I know I was just listening to a discussion with the instructor who said I will never put one of my students' essays into ChatGPT to ask it like, was it written or by this or so forth, because now I've made their essay public, right? And I've added their essay to part of this training, and they didn't give me permission to do that. That's not something that they asked if I could do. And so, anytime things get added to there, right, we're training and we're training and keep learning off of those things. And so, is there major concerns? Yes, I think absolutely. Is there anything that you as an individual can do to control it? Again, I'll agree with Jennifer. I don't think so, right? You can't control who's going to, that your instructor would take your stuff and put it into ChatGPT, right? You would assume there's a level of trust there, but not everyone knows these things, right? We're still figuring these out. So, I would say it has to go up, right? I would agree with that and say this is a bigger level policy discussion of how to protect those sorts of rights. But should you be concerned? Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so we had a few questions about where people can find out more information or learn about AI or how to get started with AI. I think we won't answer those here. We'll just send out, I'll collect some links from the panelists and we'll send those out in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered for this event. One interesting area that we haven't talked about is healthcare. In fact, I was on a meeting earlier today talking for an hour about how AI could be used in healthcare. And there was a question about, please, can you give examples of how to use AI in a smart way in the clinical settings with the nursing students, which is interesting because we don't have nursing students at Illinois Tech, best I know, but still a good question. So I was wondering if someone want to tackle the healthcare space.
I'm sorry, I had noise in the background. What's the question again?
Oh, it's about use of AI in the healthcare space, healthcare delivery, and possibly, using it for diagnosing and treating diseases.
Oh, it is expanding hugely in healthcare. Everything from, for example, they use facial recognition to identify patients who wander around the hospital and get lost because they have mental illness, to how do you go in and clinically diagnose symptoms that for a doctor to go in and spend the time to do all that research and diagnose it properly and then to come up with that. They're also using AI for the patient care, right? For us, like for an example, if I were during COVID, if I wanted to go to make an appointment with a doctor, we can track like where you are, and if you drive along, you get close, and you can say that, and then book you in automatically at the office and identify you. I mean, it's like there are a lot of different ways that we can use AI in the healthcare, including like all the imaging and like remote surgeries. And I'm sorry, I can go on, but there's a lot of areas, especially in healthcare, that can use AI.
Yeah, I married this person who's in charge of AI in healthcare in Massachusetts. So I have to have way too many dinner conversations about this one. AI has been used in healthcare for a long time, right? So it's been used in healthcare for some of these analytic tools. It's been used in robotic surgeries. It's been used a lot. Some of the ways in which they're trying to imagine using healthcare actually is running up against state and federal policies around patient protection, patient health, HIPAA, but not just HIPAA, like there's a lot of sub-policies that intersect with healthcare. The challenge that a generative AI and not more traditional data science reactive AI is facing in healthcare is people who are interested in moving into this space don't actually have their head wrapped around what all these policies are, and are not reactive enough when Medicare policies change around patient privacy and so forth. So what we're beginning to see is the use of generative AI in healthcare take off much more in countries that have, I'll call them loosier-goosier protections for individual human privacy. In the US, this is really getting some fits and starts. People want to be doing it, but how we have to train those data models, how the insurance intersects for malpractice, all of these things really matter, and we have to think about it so carefully.
Right. If I may add a bit here, I'm not an expert in this health domain, but I'm very interested in actually some of my recent projects are exploring how we can possibly tackle the issue of health disparity here. When we talk about using AI for drug discovery, for treatment prediction, we do need to care about the population we're helping with, right? So people are talking about how we can, use different types of EHR data and then use data mining or machine learning techniques to help the decision making for doctors. But the issue here is maybe this decision may not be equally fair to different groups. So this is a serious issue. People are working on this, and I just want to say, this is another very important problem we are working on, is how we can ensure this, mitigate these health disparities when we think about AI for health domain. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple questions along a similar line. We have students who are going to be graduating into an AI world in the next couple of years. And the general question is, how should we be training our students for the future workforce? What skills, traits, and mindsets do students need to master and embody to make them successful throughout their lives?
That's a big question.
That is a big question, but maybe just a few, each of you can maybe just give a few
Well,
things to think about, and
thinking is never going to. Right, go ahead.
I can say, like, from the more like humanistic side, at least, and then I'll throw the tech aspect of that too to others. But I think in terms of critical skills, kind of moving forward into the workforce, these higher level critical thinking skills, I think, become crucial. Your ability to do kind of like your basic level tasks are maybe no longer as interesting or marketable. So your ability to, for example, like summarize a text or repeat back something that, or those are no longer sort of as novel of skills, perhaps. But your ability to look at an argument and say, hey, where does it fall apart? Or look at something ChatGPT produces and say, hey, what is it missing here? In what way is it biased? In what way is this actually made up information, right? And sort of detect those things. So your ability, in other words, to be a human, right? And to do that sort of human critical thinking work. I think that becomes insanely useful as we move into the sort of workforce, right? When we can automate more and more of the smaller tasks, it's the higher level tasks that become more useful and more marketable, and I think set you apart, right? As you're thinking about, applying to jobs and sort of marketing yourself and your skills. So I would say those humanities skills, those critical thinkings, the writing types of skills, I would say become huge. I can't speak to the technical aspects of the skills you need, so I'm going to throw that one out.
Critical, thinking, problem solving is always going to be important. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the technical people always make a very fundamental mistake, which is before you start tackling a problem, you have to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? And if you think that a technology is very cool, like AI, then you have to ask yourself, like, what problem am I going to try to solve with AI? And more importantly, what are the consequences and unintended consequences of it? So you need to think of it that way. And for those of you, if you're going to go into AI and you hear about, the bias and everything else, get yourself familiarized right now and start following what are the current data privacy rules and regulations are. What are the current status? What are people thinking? Why are they? So especially at this point in time, the key thing is that because you're at the forefront right now, and the good news, especially if you're a student, you're not actually defining the policy, listen in to all the pros and cons, because by the time the policy comes out, then you understand why did they create that rules the way they did, and if you understand that, when you go in and use AI as a tool or develop AI as a engineer developer or a data scientist, you'll be able to circumvent some of the things that would cause problems in the future, right? Because just I keep on telling my team, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it doesn't matter if you go out and build this wonderful tools that everybody's asking for, and then only for it to then cause the whole entire company to be penalized because it violates some kind of rules because you just didn't understand. Because for an example, I am allowed to identify gender, but only under very narrow circumstances. And that's what you have to understand. Just because you're allowed to have the data, but how it is being used is also, being highly regulated too as well. Okay. Hopefully that helps.
I think this question is also, what is the purpose of education? So K through 12 education, not only is it preparing people to enter a workplace, it's preparing people to be informed voting citizens of a democratic nation. And so what is the role of AI-based education if we're bringing it down into K through 12? Some of it might be to give them computational thinking, because our world is becoming more computational in its tools, but it definitely needs to be intersecting what is it to be an informed civic public. And I think some of the questions I was watching happen in the chat are touching on this. Like, what about fake news? What about fake pictures? What about, like, how do we start engaging with that? And that's an educational goal. Illinois Tech has a computer science across the curriculum mandate. All students have to take some form of computer science. And so if you think about what the original trivium of all education, university education was, it was mathematics, it was grammar, and it was rhetoric. And computer science has, by and large, adopted the formal structures of mathematics and grammar into its activities. And what we're beginning to see with generative AI is it's adopting some of the formal structures of rhetoric now. And so then what is a future of education that starts engaging with it? And it's twofold in the same way that all of these are twofold, right? One is consumption and critical consumption of it, and one is production and critical production of it. So does that mean that everyone has to become a computer scientist? No, but is computer science and thus the underlying logic of data now shaping how we think? Yes, and so there has to be some form of educational engagement with that. And that's what I think the future of education is. I think someone in the chat also asked, and maybe Lance, now I'm thinking back, you asked this of all of us, are professors disappearing? No, and it's exactly for this reason. You go to universities to learn how to think like a group of people, and you can't learn to think like an AI. And so what is the role of education at that point? That's what I would say. Like, it's so big and multi-pronged because it is now symbolically integrated into our entire culture.
I mean, just a statement that somebody mentioned about how the government, the rules and regulations varies from state, to state and local laws and everything. You can just teach a whole entire course just on that, right? And the reasons why that is so. I mean, like, for example, in the insurance industry, you have to be certified in a specific location in order for you to sell, insurance, and only to that, specific state and location. And that's the same thing. What happened is that until you have a federal rules that is common across the board, each and every single state is going to have to define their own. And that's the reasons why you have to be very careful about that. And one of the things too is, like, for an example, way back when, data, at that time we were concerned about, like, where data stored, because how it's being used. Some states would not allow you to store your customers' information in a separate country altogether. And that's a huge deal. That means that if you do that, then all of a sudden you're no longer allowed to, operate outside of the country or state.
Okay, I mean, I think we got a little bit away from the original question, which is what, concepts should I learn? Personally, I think, I always view AI as not something that's going to replace you, as a tool, sort of like, to date myself, when we got calculators when I was in high school. I think just figuring out how to use it when it's good to use it, and how not to use it when you don't need to use it, is probably the most critical thing you can try to learn about AI. Here's an interesting question. Is there consensus about the areas that AI should not be used, e.g. use of killer robots in a battlefield or population surveillance, etc.? If not, should we try to develop the consensus?
Consensus among whom? I mean, that's the question. Is it limited to nation states? Is it a global consensus? Is it an academic consensus? We can't find consensus among nuclear weapons, if you're watching the news this week. So I'm wondering how we can have consensus around this. That's my
Well,
view, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's been, I've heard about recently is face recognition. I mean, right now we have technology. You could aim your phone at someone in a bar or wherever and find out, who they are and, basic information about them. And this seems to be something that a lot of people are trying to ban, but not necessarily successfully. So I don't know how we enforce it, even if there was consensus.
Mhm.
Did you?
Yeah, I think there are many applications we should be careful when we think about growing AI models, right? Especially those we call high-stake applications in healthcare or other, really human-related applications. We should be very careful because we should consider all these kind of privacy issues, how we can protect this, for example, user data and then patient data, how we can, ensure that this model is not doing something wrong that is not expected. There are many applications we should be thinking, maybe a second or third before we deploy that.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left, so I think maybe I'll just do a quick go around each person and have any closing thoughts you want to say about anything that we've discussed with today or anything else about AI. I guess I'll go in the same order I went before. So, Big Thay.
What I want to say is that AI to me is similar to when we went through the whole internet and the World Wide Web revolution, decades ago. When it first came out, we were all excited about it. All of a sudden it's made available because it kind of globalized, and then eventually at first only companies with the budget can build a website. And the hot skill at the time were webmasters, right? And developers. But as it's become more and more accepted and popular, there were a lot of tools that built out to the point where now anybody, even a child, can go in and build a website. So my point is AI is an exciting tool that, because we're at the forefront right now, I encourage everyone to, and because of the impact that it can have in our lives, that we should stop and pause to understand what it is and what we're about to implement before we do it. And I say pause from a personal, everybody here, pause, think about what we're doing, the intended and unintended consequences. One of the participants say risk. In short, it's a risk, right? What are all the risks? And make sure you understand that before you implement it and create all the guardrails that are necessary. And please do participate in the policy, rules, and regulations, because all of you have some good insights and experiences that will enrich it more and make it even more safe for everyone to use.
Thanks. Jennifer?
Yeah, I really enjoy listening to my colleagues here. Yeah, so I would say moving forward, and I think about this a lot, because we've had AI embedded into our life for decades, and I think most of us are just kind of used to it at that point. Again, coming from the video game side, we always talk about game AI, right? So it's not that we're just talking about a medium that is going to fundamentally transform our work. It fundamentally transforms our leisure and our play too. Like it's transforming who we are as human beings. And so I find it really exciting for that. Like it's following a trajectory. We're being creative in how we go about doing it, but simultaneously there's Black Mirror implications for this, right? And in my evening cocktail hour talking about the future of AI with other people, like one of the things we ended up talking about was that if technology is a systematized approach to a defined problem, it seems like the current discourse around this round of AI defines the problems as human beings. And so I'd like us to interrogate that a little bit. And what is it that we're trying to be additive to rather than subtracting the messiness of the human being from the situation? That's what I would add.
Thanks, Jennifer. Kai?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this panel. I really learned a lot. So I think, I really want to talk about this, how there's a huge potential using AI for social good in many applications, especially this new wave of generative AI such as ChatGPT. But we also need to be very careful about potential challenges created by these large language models, right? For example, it can create hallucinating information. It can create fake images, fake videos, all of these deep fakes. So we really think about and be careful about these potential harms that can be caused by large language models when we think about this potential and opportunities. So I would say, ultimately, when we think about AI models, we want to use it for human beneficial, right? And we want to maximize the beneficial of human beings and human values. So how can we do that? There's a lot of challenges and opportunities. People are talking about how we can align, human feedback versus machine learning model prediction. There's a lot of not only technical, but also ethical and policy, discussions to be done here. And how we can build more safe and reliable models, generative AI models, to protect user privacy and to ensure less abusive and less biased decision making. All of these are very, from my point of view, great research problems we can work on in the future. Yeah.
Thanks. And finish us off, Hannah.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I would kind of add to what everyone else has sort of said here is that there's a lot of reasons to be excited about new generative AI tools and what they can do. And I think a lot of us have felt that excitement over the last several months, especially. And so I would say I'd absolutely be excited about it, figure out what can happen. But I think what's important, and I constantly keep reminding myself and students, is that it is a tool, right? And it can do certain things and it cannot do certain things. And most importantly, I think that it's not sort of a magic wand, right? Where you can make anything happen, right? And sort of just like trust the output blindly. But just like with any other new tool that comes out, and I think of this from like natural language processing tools as well, that come out, and the results might kind of look good on the surface, but when you dig, you see problems, right? You have to figure out what to do with them and how to understand them. And the same sort of thing, right? There's problems as we dig and under the surface, and so I like my main kind of takeaway, if I could leave everyone with the thought, would be to take sort of a balanced approach, right? Absolutely be excited. But do be aware, right, when you kind of scratch at the surface, there's still room for the human, right? And figuring out kind of how we live as humans and operate as humans with this tool kind of alongside us.
Well, can I add one that's my personal favorite about AI that excites me so much? Is the fact that, okay, on one hand, because the huge computing power is causing heating and environmental problems. And because of that, a lot of the companies like NVIDIA, Intel, Google, they're all working on chips, design to make it more efficient and less heating and less impact, with less impact to the climate. At the same time, they're using these type of design and AI to solve some of our climate change. So there are actually some successful projects out there that are greening our world again. I'm hoping that continues to be the trend.
Thanks. So we got a lot more questions. So I really appreciate it. I'm sure this will not be our last panel on AI. It's because AI is not going anywhere. I really want to thank our panelists, Hannah Ringler, Jennifer DeWinter, Dick Thuy Le, Kai Xu. Thanks to Scott Pfeiffer, Erica Burt, Yolanda Freeman, and keep a lookout. Yolanda's going to send an email with some more information and a survey, and also just keep a lookout, because I'm sure we do a number of these kind of panels and discussions throughout the year in College of Computing, relating not just AI, but all aspects of computing. So thanks for everyone for coming, and I hope you have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.